felt as though I were an inconvenience. I wrote that sentence back in March of 2019 in an email to Carnival Guest Relations just 4 days after I got off my very first solo cruise, which just so happened to be on board the Carnival Breeze. And I want you to understand exactly who was routing it, because it was not some nervous first-time cruiser, because at that point in time, I had 8 Carnival cruises behind me. I was gold in Carnival's VIFP program, and I was actually the guy my family and friends consulted before they booked any type of cruise. And reading that email back now is a little painful, not because the facts were wrong in it. The things I described in there absolutely happened, but what I thought they meant, I was absolutely wrong there. I thought I'd found a problem with how one cruise line treated solo cruisers, but I was actually quite wrong there. 40-some cruises later, almost all of those solo, and I can see now exactly where I was wrong in my initial assessment of solo cruising. And I want to share with you some common solo cruising misconceptions, and I'm sharing these instead of a list of tips, because tips won't do you any good if the picture in your head is wrong to begin with. Now here's the first misconception, and it's the one I believe the hardest because I had the receipts to back it up, and that is you need to have previous cruise experience under your belt before you try solo cruising. 8 cruises prior, I had that gold VIFP status. I knew where the buffet was and I knew how to do the muster drill, but none of that carried me anywhere. Why is that? Well, because experience with cruising is not the same thing as experience with cruising alone. Those are 2 pretty different experiences, and the first one hardly transfers over to the second. And think about this for just a second, because everything I knew about cruising was about the ship itself. Nothing I knew was about being one person inside a system that's built for 2 people or more. And the stuff that actually trips up a solo cruiser had just never come up in 8 cruises, because there was always someone there accompanying me. So if you're sitting there waiting until you feel ready to cruise solo, well, you're waiting on something that, quite frankly, just isn't coming. Just get out there and try it if you think it's for you, because there is no prior experience required. Now, this second misconception might be the most common of them all, and in my opinion, it's the one that stops the most people from ever booking a solo cruise in the first place, and that is that solo cruisers are just single people hoping to meet somebody, so you have to be single to do it. And the confusion, I think, here is really between 2 completely different products. A singles cruise is something that's a hosted, organized sailing that exists to introduce single people to each other, but solo cruising is simply just booking a cabin for one. Now, these 2 things get talked about like they're the same, when really they have almost nothing to do with each other. In 2024, a general manager over at Intrepid Travel put it pretty plainly to National Geographic. It's a misconception that all solo cruisers are single. A lot of them simply have different interests than their partners do, and Norwegian Cruise Line commissioned some research that backs that up. Now, this was a British survey of a couple thousand adults in the UK, but when they asked people why they'd taken a solo trip, the top 2 answers were, number 1, just to have a break at 33%, and number 2, to treat themselves at 30%. Only 17% said they booked a cruise to reconnect with themselves after a breakup. Now, let me be real with you on the data here, because nobody actually publishes marital status for cruise passengers specifically. What we've got is broader solo travel research, and in that, a Skyscanner survey which found close to 1/3 of women and more than 1/3 of men traveling alone are actually married, and 65% said they went alone because the people in their life just do not share the same travel interests. But that's travel data in general and not specific to cruise data, so we can take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But I do think it can be applied to cruising. And here's what I can tell you from my own sailings and interactions with other solo cruisers via the community I've built here on YouTube, and it lines right up with a lot of that. And that is, a lot of us who cruise solo do not do it because we are single or because we have to, but rather because it's what works best for us. I actually have friends and family who want to cruise with me just about every cruise that I go on, but I've learned to go along because I really enjoy cruising solo. And I think a lot of my fellow solo cruisers would agree with me on that. Now, before I get to the third misconception, this video is sponsored by Cruises.com. And stick with me here because this one actually ties right into something that's coming up later in the video. Cruises.com has their own rewards program, and it stacks right on top of your cruise line loyalty. So You still earn all of your normal points, your VIP points, Crown and Anchor, Latitudes, whatever it happens to be that you're chasing. You're just now earning in 2 places on the same exact booking instead of just the one. And the points you accumulate stack on your cruise line loyalty no matter what room you end up picking. Now those points can be redeemed for onboard credit, excursion credits, cash back, Uber vouchers, and they show up about 2 months before you sail, which means you can spend them on the same cruise you just booked. But the rewards are really only half of the story here, because cruises.com also has deals that you're simply not getting when you book direct with the cruise line. I'm talking about things like extra onboard credit, prepaid gratuities, and even specialty dining perks. You can shop multiple cruise lines side by side in one place instead of opening 6 different websites to compare prices. And you've got actual people to call when your plans change, which if you cruise enough, they certainly are going to. So here's how you can take advantage of it. Head on over to cruises.com/Zach. Create a free rewards account and use promo code ZAC50 when you sign up. Then when you book your cruise, you'll get the points equivalent of $50 in onboard spending. All the details are in the description below. Now let's get to that third misconception. Eating alone is going to be the worst part of the solo cruising experience, because it's not the money that stops most people from cruising solo. It's dinner. It's imagining walking in to the main dining room by yourself night after night and feeling like the whole room quietly notices that you're all alone. Now, I've eaten hundreds of dinners alone on cruise ships, from the main dining room, specialty restaurants, the buffet, room service, and I have never once felt watched. Why is that? That's because the reality is nobody is watching, nobody cares. Everybody in that dining room is dealing with their own dinner, their own table, their kids, their sunburn, their onboard account. That picture that we have of a room full of strangers tracking the guy or the lady sitting and eating by themselves is something we build up in our heads before we go. And then we get there and it just never happens. And look, if you do want the company, it's a lot easier than most people think. Norwegian Cruise Line actually has a keycard access studio lounge just for solo guests with daily happy hours. Most cruise lines now feature solo meetups every night of the cruise, and some even do solo tables in the main dining room, where all solo travelers are invited to join if they'd like some company for dinner. That's not really for me, but it is certainly an option if you prefer not to dine alone, or prefer not to feel like people are watching you because you are dining alone. And that last thing there is the smartest setup I've come across, because it's just a table that exists and nobody is taking attendance at it. You can go every single night if you want, or you can just go one time, or you can never go at all, and not one person is going to follow up with you about it. You get to choose meal by meal, and you're allowed to change your mind tomorrow if you want to, and that isn't some consolation prize for not having somebody to travel with. For a lot of us, that is the reason why we do it this way. Solo cruising is quite liberating. You make your own choices. Some of the best days I've ever had at sea, I've had completely by myself because of that. Now here's the part nobody really talks about. This fourth misconception I'm going to present took me a lot of ships to figure out. The problem is not that people leave you out. For me, it's the exact opposite. When somebody finally notices you sitting there by yourself, the natural read isn't, oh, that guy planned this. It's, oh, that poor guy got left behind. And most people, being decent, good people, decide that somebody ought to do something about that guy being by themselves. So they do. The couple at the next table might wave you over. Somebody at the bar might start up a conversation and then keeps it running for 40 minutes past where you would have let it die. A server asks you warmly and meaning every single word of it whether somebody will be joining you at the table tonight. I've had people approach me on so many of my cruises and invite me to join them for dinner, or offer to go on excursions with me, or ask if I'd like some company while I enjoy my coffee at the coffee shop. And here's the thing, these people are being kind. Nobody is being condescending to you. They are doing exactly what you'd want a decent person to do if they thought somebody was alone and didn't want to be. But you can't really turn down kindness cleanly, right? There's no good way to say, I'm having a great week and I actually picked this on purpose. That either comes out sounding like a rejection of them or a lie. So you either take the invitation you didn't want, or you spend 30 seconds explaining your whole life to a stranger who was only trying to help you out. I picked this. I enjoy this. I'm not inconvenienced or lonely at all, I promise. And that for me is the most awkward thing about cruising alone. It's not being ignored. It's being noticed. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking the people who do it. It comes from the same place everything else in this video comes from, which is that being alone reads like a deficit. And once you see that, the whole thing gets a lot easier because you stop taking it personally in either direction. And look, if you're sitting on a first solo booking and you just wanted somebody to tell you what it's actually like instead of what the brochure says it's going to be like, well, that's exactly who this channel is for. I take most of my cruises solo and present so much information from that angle. So hit subscribe and come along on these mostly solo adventures with me. All right, let me get back to that email to Carnival for just a second, because my fifth misconception covers it quite well, and that is bad service means that cruise line doesn't value its solo cruisers. Now, what I described in my email was real. There were nights I walked up and asked the host in the main dining room for a table for one and got told very quickly that I'd have to wait if I wanted what they called a private table. Meanwhile, a couple who came in right behind me got walked straight to a two-top, and once I was actually seated, the full tables all around me seemed to get attention and mine just didn't. One night I waited over 20 minutes to be greeted and handed a menu and a drink. Another night of that cruise I actually got up and left before dessert because nobody ever even brought me a dessert menu. And over in the Lido buffet area, I'd go to my table, I'd sit my full plate of food down, walk about 20 feet to grab a drink, and come back to find a white table with my food gone, and me headed back to the buffet. Now, I sent all that in that letter to Carnival, just convinced it was a Carnival problem and how Carnival was treating solo cruisers, but it's not. Every one of those things has happened to me since on other lines, and in fact, it happens on pretty much most cruises that I go on, because this isn't a budget line problem or a premium line problem or one particular cruise line problem. Well, why is it like that? Well, think about it from the service perspective for just a second. They've got a section that they've got to work. Their whole night is about turning those tables. A four top and a one top take about the same number of trips, except one of those tables is 4 people and one of them is just you all alone. So when that room is slammed, the order that feeds the most people fastest is not the order that feels fair when you're sitting there by yourself. The buffet one is even simpler because at peak service, a table is inventory and the staff are trained to clear anything that looks abandoned. And one plate with nobody near it looks abandoned, no matter how full that plate is. And I'll give credit where it's due here, because in 7 years of solo cruising, I have almost never run into a rude crew member. But what I have run into is a system that sorts me to the back when things get busy. And those are two very different problems, and only one of them is actually somebody's fault. Now, this sixth misconception feels obvious, and that is that the dedicated solo cabin is always going to be your cheapest option. And by dedicated, I mean those cabins that are built specifically for just one person. But that's not reliably true. Solo cabins get priced on demand like everything else on the ship, and actually they're usually the very first cabin categories to sell out. So when they're tight in inventory, a studio can price above a standard inside cabin even after you've added the solo supplement into that inside. But here's the part that nobody's going to advertise on the cruise line booking page. On several cruise lines, Celebrity and Royal Caribbean included, those double loyalty points that solo cruisers earn are tied to paying the single supplement. Celebrity's own program terms spell it right out. A single traveler in a double occupancy stateroom paid at the double rate, so paying a solo supplement basically, earns double club points. So if you book their dedicated solo stateroom instead, you never pay the double rate and you don't get those double points. The cheaper room is also the slower up the loyalty ladder. And one more thing while we're in the numbers, because this causes real confusion out there, you will see the exact same fee described as a 100% single supplement and as a paying 200%. And both of those simply means that you're paying double. One is counting the surcharge and the other is counting the total. So before you compare two different cruise lines or two different prices, just check which term each of them is using. And this right here is that thing I flagged earlier. Whichever way you end up going on that, those cruises.com rewards points stack on top of it either way, because they're earned on top of the booking itself and not on which cabin you happen to pick. So that's cruises.com/Zach with promo code ZACH50, all down in the description below for your use. And that brings me to the last misconception, which I really want to be true, and I think it's partly true, but simply not the clean story like people like to tell. That is that the cruise industry is finally getting better for solo cruisers. Now let me give Norwegian Cruise Line credit where it's due first, because they invented the modern solo cabin. Studios on Norwegian Epic came out all the way back in 2010. And then in 2023, Norwegian announced close to 1,000 dedicated solo staterooms across their entire fleet, on every ship in their fleet. And then just last year that got reversed, because on an earnings call, Norwegian CEO said the company would be minimizing the number of single cabins across all three of its brands to get more passengers onto each ship. So the line that built this category just recently decided that it was in the way. So read into that whatever you will. Meanwhile, Holland America is going the complete opposite direction. Their Evolution refit is putting 30 purpose-built Solo Verandah stateroom on Oosterdam when she comes out of dry dock in late 2027. And those are 200 square feet with a private balcony. And they put them on decks 8 and 11 on their ships, not buried down in some interior corridor on a low deck. And Carnival, the line that I wrote that letter to 7 years ago now, still has no dedicated solo cabins at all on any of its ships, and they give you the same VIFP points per day, whether that cabin has one person in it or two. But here's the number that surprised me the most. The Cruise Line International Association's own reporting has solo travelers at 6% of all cruisers in 2023, then 12% in 2024, and then back down to 7% in 2025. Wah, wah. That's not a boom in solo cruising at all. That's a doubling followed by a drop right back down to baseline, which looks a lot more like a measurement wobble rather than a real movement. And I'd rather be upfront in telling you that than repeat some amazing growth story that the industry's own numbers don't support. So that's the truth about solo cruising, at least as best as I can tell it. Let me reassure you a bit if you're considering selling solo. You don't need cruise experience first. Most of the people doing this aren't who you picture them to be. Dinner is going to be just fine, and the actual awkward part is often the kindness rather than the exclusion. The service exclusion thing can be real sometimes, but don't take it personally. The cheap cabin isn't always the cheap cabin, and the industry still hasn't made up its mind about us just yet. And I got every single one of those wrong back in 2019, and put most of them in an email to a cruise line that had at most about a third of the blame, but I was wrong, and after about 40 solo cruises since that first solo experience, I can admit that now. I'm still selling solo because selling solo is right for me. I love the freedom it gives me, both in schedule and in what I choose to do with my time on board the ship. I make all the decisions and never have to poll anyone else about what I'm going to do that day. Plus, I've made some pretty cool friends and, well, all of you along the way in doing it. So let me know this. Have you ever cruised solo? And what surprised you the most about it? Or if you haven't yet, what's still holding you back? Drop it in the comments. And if you got something out of all this, then please give me a thumbs up down below. Go check out more of my videos here on the channel and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next adventure.